Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 33 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Calgary Flames, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. So, over the past 3 games, the Ducks, the Coyotes, and the Kings, the Sharks have played some pretty decent hockey. They really took it to the Ducks, won, 6-1, the final score. They played a pretty solid game besides the end of it against the Arizona Coyotes. And against the Kings, while I do think the Kings were the better team in that one, the Sharks still played pretty well and ended up getting a point out of that shootout loss. Here tonight against the Flames, it completely fell apart. One of the worst games that we have seen from the San Jose Sharks in a very long while. There was literally just turnover city here tonight in San Jose. They could not manage the puck to save their lives. Every single pass, it felt as though in the defensive zone was at risk at being picked off by the Flames, and half the times they were indeed picked off by the Flames. I think in the first period alone, the Flames had 6 odd man rushes. The Sharks had zero ability to handle the north-south game that Calgary was bringing. They were failing on connecting so many passes, and just generally it was an awful game for San Jose. In the first period, this one starts off actually relatively slow, I would say, for the first few minutes. Yes, it is tilted towards Calgary, but not by that wide of a margin. But once Toffoli scores here off of this giveaway from Jacob Megna, that's suddenly where it is completely open season. The Flames get many, many great chances for themselves, and luckily for the Sharks in the first, by a combination of the Flames just not really capitalizing on the great chances they're getting, plus Kakkonen actually playing rather well in the first period, the Sharks not only give up a single goal in that opening frame, but they actually managed to tie it up off of a Timo Meier power play goal, one of their only chances that they actually got in that first period. And yet after 20 minutes, it is 1-1. So this is the opportunity to be able to regroup. And in the second period, the Sharks, this was probably their best period. It started off not particularly well. The Flames were continuing to bring that pressure, and they would get a goal from Lucic, his first of the season, to make it 2-1 Calgary. But after that, the Sharks got a couple of okay chances for themselves. There wasn't a lot of zone time, but they managed to, find some opportunities where they laid, but they could not actually get one past Markstrom, and as such, they were trailing by 1 heading into the third period in a game that was, probably could have easily been 4-1, maybe even 5-1, thanks to the earlier parts. But they only found themselves 1 goal behind. Could they really make the big comeback in the third period? Well, it definitely wasn't to be, and we saw that very early on as Elias Lindholm scores not 1 but 2 goals within the first 30 or so seconds of this third period to turn a 2-1 close game into a 4-1 blowout almost. Especially once Dylan Dubé, a minute later, adds yet another goal to that to make it 5-1. And all 3 of these goals was just horrific defensive zone coverage from the San Jose Sharks. Just a completely forgettable first 2 minutes of this third period. If you really want to be able to go on with your season, you have to completely forget what happened in the first 2 minutes of this third period, because otherwise you were going to linger on that for so long, because it really was some of the worst hockey, the worst 2-minute stretch that we have seen from the San Jose Sharks pretty much all year. From that point onward, did the Sharks show some signs of life? Sort of ish. It was kind of like the second period where it was essentially Flames, Flames, Flames. Oh, there's a Sharks chance. Flames, Flames, Flames. Oh, there's a Sharks chance. So they had some opportunities. There were some decent looks from players honestly, Svechnikov had one, Gregor had a couple, Lorentz had one, mostly from the bottom 6, but there was literally nothing consistent here, which is not a surprise since consistently the Sharks are playing their top 6 more than their bottom 6, and the top 6 had a rough go of it here tonight. And while they would add a goal from Tomas Hertl, that one would come on the power play as well to make it 5-2, and the Sharks would then get another power play late in the game where they'd pull Kakkonen. Nothing else would actually come from it. LeBanc would get called for a goalie interference penalty while up 6-on-4, and that would just nullify everything. The Sharks wouldn't pull the goaltender again, and they'd lose it 5-2. So on to the players to talk about here on the first line, I should say. Like I mentioned just a bit ago, the top six for the San Jose Sharks definitely had a bit of a rough go of it here tonight, and it does start a bit, at the very least, with this first line. I won't say that they were the worst line for the San Jose Sharks, certainly not. They still had a couple of opportunities, and the players, at the very least, on this line did score the only goals for the San Jose Sharks. They didn't come at even strength. They came on the power play, so they don't really count in the sort of lineup look for this game, but still. And Meyer, Hurdle, LeBanc, not a great game, but Meyer and Hurdle I thought were not great, not even good, but they were somewhat average, I guess you could say. Not up to their usual standards, but certainly not the worst. Who were the worst was this second line. So even though the Matt Nieto did return to the lineup, and Matt Nieto was, of course, on the Barabanov-Couture line prior to his injury for multiple games, David Quinn decided to actually leave Nick Bonino on this second line, and Nieto ends up going onto the third line. Now, I can't necessarily blame him, because prior to the previous game against the Kings, where this line was definitely bad, the previous few games prior to that one, they were actually quite good. So I'm imagining David Quinn thought that the Kings game was just going to be a bit of a fluke, but at this point, this line does need to change. It looked completely awful. It is an exaggeration to say that these players could not connect a single pass here tonight, but it's not even that big of an exaggeration, which is just how bad these three players did look cohesively here tonight. Definitely by far the Sharks' worst line. Just awful defensive zone coverage. They found themselves on the ice, I believe, for one or two of these three goals that the Flames did score in that opening part of the third period. So just generally really, really rough look for the second line. Onto the third line, however, Nieto, like I mentioned, comes in here joining Nico Sturm and Svechnikov. Now, I mentioned that the third line actually had a pretty decent game against the Los Angeles Kings when it featured Noah Gregor, but Gregor gets bumped down to the fourth line, which was somewhat surprising, I would say. I thought maybe if Nieto wasn't going to take his spot on the second, he'd end up on the fourth, but I don't necessarily have a huge problem with it. I thought the third line was okay. Sturm and Nieto weren't super noticeable, but the one player who I did actually enjoy their game tonight was Svechnikov, which is the first time I'm kind of saying this in a while. Svechnikov, I thought, had a couple of very nice chances. There was one I believe it was the first period, where he made a very nice move to get a decent shot on net onto Markstrom, one of the Sharks' only chances in that opening 20 minutes. And so I was somewhat impressed with Svechnikov's game, and it was really the theme here tonight, where essentially the only part of the Sharks game that was good was their bottom six. Pretty much every other facet of the game, the top six, the defense, the goaltending, was not necessarily super impressive, though I will get to the goaltending a bit later if you're thinking I'm being a bit unfair to that. Moving on to the fourth line, we also saw a substitution. Since, of course, Nieto did come into the lineup, someone had to step out, and that was Oscar Lindblom. Thank God. I mentioned that he needed to be the first player out of the lineup in my review for last game, because he's just been so awful, and David Quinn finally agrees with me. Lindblom ends up being a healthy scratch, and it is Gregor joining Lorentz and Gadjevich, and it immediately pays dividends. I thought this fourth line was really, really effective for the San Jose Sharks. Obviously, they didn't actually contribute on the scoreboard, but they did a lot of very nice things for them. Lorentz had a solid game here tonight once more. There was a bit of an injury scare. I believe he gets hit with a puck within the last few minutes of the third period, but not the end of the world. Gregor, I thought, had a couple of good chances, as is per the usual for Noah Gregor. And then, of course, we did see Gadjevich at the very least get into a fight. And normally, I don't usually put a lot of faith into fights. I don't necessarily think they're that super impactful, but this fight was definitely one of the better fights that we have seen from a San Jose Sharks player in a pretty long while. This was a pretty exciting fight, and so maybe that was like an energy booster for the San Jose Sharks. Of course, we didn't see that on the scoreboard, but at least it was kind of exciting to watch as a spectator, and in a season that isn't necessarily the most exciting necessarily from a San Jose Sharks fan perspective, I guess it was cool to see. So generally, I thought a solid game for the fourth line. When it comes to the defense, I do want to mention Erik Karlsson. This was the absolute classic Erik Karlsson game. On the offensive side of things, he's making plays happen. He's showing off his elite vision with his incredible passes. This pass on the Timo Meier goal that tied the game at 1 was just absolutely amazing. The way that he gets this puck, he fakes the shot perfectly and then sends an amazing just slap pass to Timo Meier for the easy tap-in goal. It completely fools Markstrom. It completely fools the Calgary Flames defenders, and it was like the easiest goal in Timo Meier's career. So it was an incredibly impressive offensive game from Erik Karlsson, but on the defensive side, he was a big part of the issues that the San Jose Sharks had in the defensive zone. Multiple miscued passes, multiple just plays where he tries to make like the slick move, but there's like a seemingly some sort of lack of communication. There was this one where Karlsson's in the corner in his own zone and he sends a puck to the middle of the ice because he thinks Logan Couture is going to be going to the middle of the ice, but Couture thinks that Karlsson's going to play it up the boards, and so it ends up just being a pass right to the middle to a Flames player who gets a great chance, and that was like the 10th time that a giveaway led to a great chance for the Flames in that game. And so Karlsson, he was definitely at the forefront of that, but he was not the only defenseman in this game who was really a victim of these plays. Megna, we obviously saw his awful giveaway that led to the Toffoli goal. I thought the Vlasic, Benning, and Harrington-Shemek pairings were all disasters here tonight. So generally an extremely rough game for the Sharks defensively. And then finally we have the goaltender Kähkönen. Now, of course, in the first period I mentioned that he was a big reason for why the Sharks kept it at just a 1-1 game compared to how many odd man rushes the Calgary Flames did have. This is extremely true for sure. But at the end of the line, Kähkönen does let in 5 goals, and while a few of these are definitely not his fault, the Lucic one was off of an unfortunate deflection, and I believe the first Lindholm one was just like some great passing that he has not really much of a chance on, just awful coverage in front. But the Toffoli one, he technically could have had. And then of course there is the Dylan Dubé one where he is the primary reason why this goal goes in. I'm not going to mention that this is like some sort of backbreaker for the Sharks. They were already trailing 4-1. They were already pretty much out of the game at that point, but still the goal to make it 5-1 when you're making that big of a mistake is not that great. And like I mentioned, 5 goals, you're never going to necessarily look that great letting in 5 goals. So this wasn't a terrible game for Kähkönen, but he certainly didn't do the Sharks too many favors besides in the early parts of that first period. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday where they will take on the Calgary Flames again. So this is a bit of an awkward situation. Usually when you play the same team back-to-back, you're doing it in back-to-back games, but the Sharks are going to be skipping Monday. They won't have a game on Monday, obviously, and they'll be playing on Tuesday again against the Flames, and they can't really play much worse, so we'll see how it goes then. Class dismissed.